So for our second group of images, we have Jesse's photos. The first image we have is of a tree that is bent sort of diagonally to the left side of the frame, has a beautiful shadow underneath it that is from this hard sun that is coming from the right side of the frame. I think the fact that this tree is tilted slightly to the left adds an element of interest for the viewer, and especially the fact that the sun is on this part of the frame. It almost feels like the tree is kind of reacting to the sun. So there's almost a gestural movement to the image that captures our attention. The depth of field here is definitely a large depth of field, so we have foreground all the way through the background here. Again, the one complaint that I would have about this image is that it just feels like it's composed very quickly and sort of sloppily. We've got these trees in the background that kind of run interference with this tree, and some other stuff in the background here that I'm not necessarily sure really has anything to do with this. What I think might be a good solution here is getting down real low to the ground and then moving over to your left just slightly so that this tree now ends up at this part of the frame. So perhaps we'll even go ahead here and just crop this so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. And so, if we pull this like this, something like that is, maybe what I'm thinking of here. So, anyhow, try that and try that different perspective, because again, we want to get out of this habit of shooting everything sort of at that shoulder level. So technically speaking, you got what I was looking for as far as the depth of field and the lighting goes. But again, I just want you to stretch yourself in terms of creativity, and especially pay attention to how you compose your frame. And then your second image, I think, is a fantastic shot. In contrast to what you did in the previous frame, I think you got down low here. You took a vantage point that is very different. I almost feel like, maybe I'm a cat or a dog walking down the street because I'm just so low to the ground here. And this wonderful bokeh that we have going on in the background, in other words, it's all out of focus in the background, really draws our eye to the tennis ball here. And the fact that this yellow is so bright here kind of further exaggerates that attraction to the ball, almost like putting an exclamation point at the end of your technique here. So I think this is a fantastic example of a small depth of field, and very well done. So we'll look forward to your work next week. And now next up we have Heather's images. And in our first image, we've got some really hard lighting that is coming from the left part of the frame and falling across the right part of the frame. What this does is it exaggerates all of these details and all of this texture that is within this carving in stone here. So it gives it a much greater sense of three-dimensionality. In other words, it almost feels like it's embossed in this photograph because of that lighting. So excellent job using that hard lighting technique here. As far as depth of field goes, I don't really see depth of field playing an issue one way or the other in this image. I know you stated it's a large depth of field, and certainly everything is in focus here, so I can buy that end of the argument. The one thing that I think we could do to improve this image, I actually would like to see the top half of this, I don't know what we'd call this thing, this carving. It kind of feels like you just cropped it off at the top here with no real method to what you were doing. I think this ideally calls for a square frame and then including more of the top of this and getting rid of the side of it right here. So other than that, I think you did a nice job here with this image. And then your second image with the small depth of field here, uh, perfect execution of the technique, draws our eye directly to that medallion. And it also kind of brings us into this area with this wonderful moss. And it's almost like it forces us to compare the textures in the medallion versus the texture in the tree bark, and especially this wonderful little moss that's growing within each one of these little planes of that. So very well done there. The one thing I might do is I might go square on this frame too. I think this bright area of light in the upper left hand corner is kind of a little bit of a visual pull. So it pulls our eye away from this wonderful, interesting stuff going on up to this area of the frame. But you know, again, not a huge big deal here. Generally speaking, I think you got what we were looking for out of the assignment, and the images are interesting and very engaging for the viewer. So well done here. And next on our agenda is Elizabeth's photos. In her first image, we've got some backlit leaves, and this backlighting or silhouetting, we have an emphasis of these sharp edges to the leaves. So each leaf is really defined because of that lighting that is coming from behind them. It also separates these leaves in the foreground from this tree in the background. In this one, the leaves are very sharp here versus the one in the background. They're pretty soft. So it makes this tree in the foreground seem like it's much closer to the viewer than the one in the background, which then gives your image more of a three-dimensional appearance to it. So I think that part of it works. You had mentioned that this was a large depth of field. I'm not necessarily sure that this is a large depth of field image. This tree in the background is slightly out of focus, and honestly, the composition here really doesn't lend itself to a large depth of field image. There's nothing that our eye really falls on. I mean, if we asked a half dozen people where their eye goes to in this image, they'd probably all point to a different spot. So the idea for this assignment really was to create an image with a large depth of field that led our eye through either line or some other compositional element to the thing that was exciting or interesting in the photograph. And while these leaves, I think, are very interesting, and especially the shapes, you know, I think have a unique appearance to them, ultimately, I'm not sure the image is successful because our eye really doesn't land anywhere and the image doesn't hold our attention because of it. So when you're composing your images, you really need to keep that in the forefront of your mind. Your second image here is a low vantage point image from, looks like the street across from Wegmans. One thing you had pointed out here that this was kind of soft light, and this is really a tough image to diagnose because there's all kinds of different lighting coming in here. But what we primarily want to look at and talk about is the lighting that is falling on this fire hydrant. And that lighting is definitely hard light that is coming from the side. The reason we know it's hard lighting is it's giving us these really deep, sharp shadows, and also because it's revealing all of this texture within the surface of that fire hydrant. You know, by looking at it, we can tell that this fire hydrant's been around for a long time because we can see how all the layers of paint have built up on it. So from that perspective, I think we probably want to categorize this as hard lighting. Now we do have soft lighting going on here on the ground and some of the other areas of that image, but this isn't, again, an ideal image to diagnose one way or the other. So just for argument purposes, we'll say it's hard lighting. This was also a small depth of field image. While to some degree I see it's a small depth of field, again, it's not a perfect example of a small depth of field. If you look at some of the other images in our part 3 of our critiques, you'll see a couple of them that have a really good bokeh effect going on. And what that does is really draws your attention only to the thing that's in focus here. To be honest with you, my eye is more drawn to the Wegmans in the background. And I think part of that is because we've got these lines from the car that are leading us right to that. And in fact, actually, sort of we have a psychological line here also with the fire hydrant that's also sort of pointing to that. So this is a little bit more of a challenging image. I definitely have to compliment you on taking a different vantage point and bringing an approach to this image that is uniquely different than what we're used to seeing. So from that point of view, we've got to congratulate you. But I think there's a lot of other things going on in this image that really need to be refined for it to be a really successful image. So keep at it, keep working at it, and build on some of the successes that we've had in these two images. So I look forward to seeing your stuff next week. And next in line we have Ted's images. First image, large depth of field. I think you've done a wonderful job here. Everything is in sharp focus, from these blades of grass in the foreground to the soccer ball to the trees in the background. I especially love your use of side lighting here. So this really hard sunny light that is coming from the right side of the frame and sweeping across everything in here creates this really wonderful shadow alongside the soccer ball and really separates it from the background. The other thing that I think you've done really wonderfully in your compositional strategy was to put this very colorful ball on a almost completely green background. So the repeating pattern of green is broken by this yellow and blue of the ball. And in doing so, it really draws the viewer's attention to this. So excellent job on this image. I think you nailed this one perfectly. And then over to your second image here, the bicycle. This was your shallow depth of field or small depth of field. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of buy that. The trees are sort of out of focus. Is this the best example of a small depth of field I've ever seen? Definitely not. But I think you've got the right idea. And the thing that I think is really working here in this image is, again, that wonderful hard side lighting that you have going here. It really brings emphasis to the shape and the formal elements of this bicycle. And I'm particularly drawn to the textures in this tire here. This image feels like it's almost riding out into my space here. So very well done on the lighting. Depth of field, not perfect, but I get where you're going. Probably the reason that the depth of field isn't entirely out of focus is that you used a 30mm lens or a 30mm focal length, which is kind of wide angle. And you just have to remember, when we start working with wide angle lenses, almost everything's in focus, and it's really difficult to get that good bokeh with a wide angle lens. What I would suggest doing here is actually stepping back a few feet and then zooming in. So maybe your lens is at 55mm, and I think that way you're going to get the same field of view, but you're going to get a little bit better bokeh because the lens focal length will have changed here. So good job on that. And just on one other note on your exposure here, I think maybe you could be just a teeny bit darker on your exposure. So if we maybe go something like that, I think that image really pops there then. So overall, really good job here, Ted, this week. Well done.